Hi, my name's Anne from Orchid Systems, and today I'm going to run through EFT processing for payroll. This is a training video. But first of all, is EFT processing the right product for you? Do you need to send payments electronically to vendors or employees, collect receipts from your customers via direct debit, or send positive pay files to your bank? How confident are you that all your cash movements are secure and would stand up to an audit? Would you like to cut costs and improve efficiency through increased automation, enhanced auditability, and reduce exposure to fraud by moving away from paper checks or streamlining positive pay file processing? If the answer is yes to any of those points, then EFT processing might be the product for you. I'm first going to give an overview of the EFT processing for payroll. It supports Sage 300 Canadian and US payroll, and it allows you to create EFT files for the Canadian and US payroll check run. It creates the electronic files for your bank. At this stage, we have over 550 bank formats currently supported, and we're adding on average one per week. The formats are user definable, so you can create them yourselves, and we add new formats at no additional charge. EFT processing can provide enhanced security. You can encrypt the employees and your own bank branch number and account number. So throughout the system, it only displays the series of asterisks with the last 4 digits of the bank branch number and the bank account number. The changes to the EFT employee details are logged, the date and time, who did the change, from what to what. And you can have a 2-level security for staff entering EFT details. So one staff member may be able to enter EFT details but not make the record active. And then a second staff member needs to approve and make the EFT details active. It keeps a full audit of date and time the EFT files were created and all the details, including the bank account details for the employees at that point in time, are logged in the audit trail. And you can put a password on the PDF remittance advices. First, we're going to activate the module. We're going to review the licensing and the configuration options of EFT. Then we're going to review the EFT transactions, the frequently used reports, and the periodic processing audit trails. Then we're going to have a look at the EFT file formats, the formats.ini and the user formats.ini. We'll look at the sample remittance advice that comes with the product and how you can amend that when sending remittance advices to your EFT employees. And then we're going to look at payroll-specific reports that are provided by EFT Payroll, which allows you to email the Sage 300 US or Canadian pay slips or pay stubs, the T4s and Releve ones from the Canadian payroll. So these are not really EFT functionality, but because we have the details and we have the employees' email addresses, we can email these forms to employees. So now I'm going to go ahead and install the module and activate the module and show you how to activate that in Administration Services Activate. Then we'll go to the EFT processing licensing screen and we'll have a look at your license so you can check that you're licensed for payroll, and if you have AP and AR and payroll, to see how you can check that. And then we're going to go ahead and configure EFT processing. We're going to use the EFT processing payroll visual process flow. And from there, we're going to look at the security options that you have available as part of EFT processing for payroll. We'll look at the options, the EFT options. So we'll look at the payroll tab, the primary bank tab, the payroll email tab, default advices for payroll, the global file sequence numbers if you're using that, and the updates tab. And then we'll go ahead and configure EFT banks and EFT employees and email messages. After downloading the appropriate install shield from our website, you can run the install shield. If this is the first time you've installed EFT on this particular machine, then you will be prompted for a serial number and an activation code. If you have the activation code, you can click on this option and fill in the activation code, or you can install for 30 days and within 30 days enter the activation code once you receive it. If you do not have a serial number, you can use one of the NFR serial numbers that is on our website in the appropriate program version area. After installing the programs, you would go and activate in the appropriate companies. Once EFT has been activated, you can go to the license code area to check your license. And by keying in your activation code, you can check your licensing. And this license is for payroll only. If I was running EFT for AP and AR and payroll, I would see all those three options here. We would recommend doing the setup for EFT for payroll using our process flow. So you should first go to Assign Visual Process Flows and assign the EFT payroll one to those users that are going to use it. So I'm going to use the admin user and assign the EFT processing for payroll. And here we have the EFT processing visual process flow. Using the visual process flow to guide us through the setup options, first we're going to consider the security. So for EFT, there's a number of different security groups, but only some of these apply to payroll. And the ones that apply to payroll are these highlighted ones. And the two I'm going to call out here is the ability to approve or view the unencrypted employee's account details. So what you can do is have the status of the EFT employee to be set to either inactive or entered when it's first created, and then give a second person the ability to approve the EFT employee's details. So the entry of the employee's details could be a two-step process. Also, you are able to encrypt the bank and branch details for the EFT employees. So what you can do is have one employee who can approve the employee's unencrypted bank account details, and then all other users would see the employee's bank account details encrypted or as masked with asterisks and the last four digits shown. So you would give the approvers this security group. You can also apply passwords to the PDF remittance advice, payslip, and T4 and Releve 1 if you are emailing those to your employees. And only those users with this security group are able to view the unencrypted employee password. In the EFT options, you set the other configuration options for EFT for payroll. When you first open the EFT options, and also after you've installed a product update, the first time you open EFT options, you may see this loading file types. This is because the formats.ini, which is a text file, if it's more recent than the version of the formats.ini that's in the database, the latest formats will be reloaded for you to be always working on the right version. The formats.ini gets loaded when you open EFT options and also when you go to create EFT file. In the instance when the formats.ini or user formats.ini is more up to date than the version in the database. On the payroll tab, you can configure EFT to allow the EFT file creation from a payroll period end date range, yes, or from a single payroll period end date. We would recommend a single payroll period end date as it is easier to audit and check. You can also configure EFT processing to allow unposted payroll checks to be selected for the EFT file. Because they can be changed before they're posted, we would recommend that you do not allow unposted payroll checks to be selected. If you can organize your EFT employees that all the employees in the same payroll period end date are paid via EFT, we would recommend that you set this configuration setting to display an error and abort the export. So if an employee is not defined in EFT employees, you want to display an error and abort the export. Otherwise, if you have a mixture between checks and EFT payments in a single payroll period end date, you can select skip the employee and continue with the export. So for those employees that you're not going to pay via EFT, you don't enter the EFT record. But it's not as easy to check the total for the EFT file matching the payroll period end date. And finally, you can configure the creation of the EFT file to be from a group of records from the payroll period end date, where you select which ones you want to pay, or you could say, no, you do not allow selective payments. We would recommend typically do not allow selective payments. And only perhaps if you had the bank account details for one of the employees wrong, perhaps you re-export the payroll period end date and choose just that one employee. With the default employee status, you can specify when an EFT employee record is created, whether the status should default to entered, active, or inactive. If you make it entered or inactive, then you could have a second person who can approve the employee's bank account details, and they would be the one who could then mark it active. When creating an EFT file, the EFT employee's record will only be used if the status is active. If you select this option, encrypt employee's BSB/account number, then the employee's bank account details will be masked and you will only see the last 4 digits of the branch number and the account number, except for those users who are able to view the unencrypted bank account details. This is where you define the primary bank for the EFT employees, and it's based on the formats.ini specification for this primary bank that the fields will be labeled accordingly on the EFT employee record. If you want to apply a password to the EFT remittance advice to employees and to the payslip and Releve 1 and T4, then you can specify a formula here for the password, or if you don't specify a formula here, on each individual employee's record, you can specify the password. But if you want to use, for example, the left 3 characters of the employee's name plus the left 3 characters of their social security number, you could do something like the following. You can use any of the fields on the Canadian payroll or US payroll employee record. And you can also specify a master password. If the employee forgets the password, then it can be opened by this master password. On the Default Advice tab, you can fill in the default payroll remittance advice to be sent to employees when payments are made. You can also fill in the default check format and payslip format if you do want to use EFT to email your payslips to your employees. And if you are emailing your payslips to your employees, you can fill in a path here and it will store the PDF, the password protected PDFs in this directory. You also fill in the Releve 1 report and the T4 report from the CT directory if you are emailing the Releve 1 and T4s to your employees. On the Payroll Email tab, you fill in your email server details if you want EFT to send your payroll remittance advices and the T4s, Releve 1s, and the payslips to the employees using these server details. If you leave this blank, the emails will be sent via your default method set up in Sage 300, which may be Outlook, or if you filled in SMTP in Common Services. If you are going to use these email details for sending your remittance advices, you fill in the server name here. And if you're not using the default port, you can fill in the colon port number to use. The next 4 fields may or may not be mandatory depending on the email server that you're using and the security that has been enabled for that email server. Because you're now not sending your emails via your Open Outlook client, you'll no longer have a copy in your sent box. So you might want to CC or BCC yourself on the emails being sent. And if you're sending via this email server filled in on this screen, you can also choose to limit the emails per minute or limit the emails per session, which might be a restriction of your particular email server. We would recommend you also send a test email on the screen to check your email service is working. The global file sequence numbers can be used to allocate a running number across multiple banks, but I'll discuss this further when we're discussing the formats.ini. And on the Updates tab, you can click Check for Updates to ensure that you're on the latest product update. After completing your EFT options, you would set up your EFT banks. This information zoom button will show you all the banks that you've set up in Common Services, and from here you would fill in the EFT details for those banks that you're going to use for EFT. So for payroll, I'm going to choose the PR bank and specify the format for the PR bank. You notice once I selected the required format, these field labels changed based on the CAN CPA 005 format. And later in this presentation, I'll go through how you can configure new fields and optional fields for the specific format that you need. But it's the EFT file type here that determines what fields are available for filling in on the EFT bank. You would fill in your financial institution ID and your account number. And based on your formats.ini, we can link to specific help for specific fields. For the EFT file that's created, you can either create a file on a network drive or you can FTP that file. If you do choose FTP, you'd fill in the host name, user, and password to that FTP site. So the user creating the EFT file does not know these details. The file will get created on this SFTP straight away. But for this, I'm just going to select a file, and you can choose how you want that file to be named. It could be by pay period end date, or you could be using a file sequence number or a fixed file name. If you choose fixed file name, these are all the variables that you can use in the file name. But for payroll, I'm going to choose the payroll period end date for my file and put it in my payroll directory. And you can nominate the extension. Some banks require a particular extension, otherwise you can use any extension that you want for that particular file. And for the CAN CPA 005, I also need to know the 10-digit originator number. If I was running with EFT for AP and AR, I would have similar tabs to fill in for the AP payments and the AR direct debits. And finally, in your EFT banks, for payroll, you would typically use a regular account. The clearing bank account is only used for AP payments, where you can have the detail posted to the clearing bank account and the summary transferred to the real bank account if required. But for payroll, you would normally set them up as a regular bank account. Then you would set up the EFT details for all your employees. This finder is on your Canadian payroll or US payroll employees. And this finder is on the EFT employees that you have already set up. So I could select the first employee and then fill in the necessary details. If you are going to be paying by the CAN CPA 005, i.e. the default one that's a file format that's on the bank, then you needn't fill in a file type here. But if you want, you can fill in a file type here, and then this employee will only be selected when this file type is being used when you come to create the EFT file. Depending on your option that you've set up in the EFT options, the status of the employee would be entered active or inactive if you have set it up on EFT options. But I'm as an administrator, so I can make it active straight away. You can select for the EFT remittance advices and the payslip and the T4s and Releve ones, you can select to use the EFT email or the payroll email or mail. If it's mail, we won't be emailing the details to the employee. If you select EFT email, then you would fill in the email details here. If I've selected to have a password on my remittance advice for the remittance advice PDF, then I would use the options that's set up in EFT options on the payroll tab, or I could specify a password here specifically for this particular employee. And this is the auto-generated password, which was the first 3 digits of the employee ID followed by the first 3 digits of their social security number off the employee record. And you can choose to split the pay and pay into as many bank accounts as is required. You can either have a fixed amount, so you might want a fixed amount of $1,000 going to this particular bank account, and that can have an end date. If there's no end date, then it'll assume forever. And this will go to the HSBC Financial Institution ID. And you can specify a payment reference to be included in that file. If you're going to play the remainder into a second account, you'd use a percentage remaining amount, which would be 100%, and this will go to the Citibank. You could fill in the first employee's bank account details and then export this record to create yourself a template to import the remaining transactions. You should delete any of the password fields. And that includes this XBSB number and X account number. And depending on the EFT file format that you set in your primary bank in EFT options, some more or less of these fields may be used for that particular format. In this particular case, we're not using that format at all. It's just the core fields that are being used for this particular format. After completing your template with all the employees and their payment details, including the spread or the fixed amount, this file can be re-imported. And finally, on your EFT employees, if the default primary bank that you had set up in EFT options on the payroll tab required or implied that extra fields were required for the employees, then they would be turned on in the details area for each of the employees. You may get extra fields turned on here and extra tabs if more fields are required. But in this case, using the CAN CPA 005, all we need is the payment reference, the financial institution ID, and the account number. And the final setup you need to do is the email message templates for your EFT remittance advices. You can use variables from the employee record, which are described in the F1 help. You can prefix the field name by $employee, and that will give you either the US payroll or the Canadian payroll, and then any field name from that particular record. For example, hi, $employee first name. Please find attached your remittance advice for payroll period end date $PEREND, because you can use any field from the EFT payroll audit log, the ELPLOGD. And you can also use these company variables. And you can use these variables in the subject too. We have now seen how to install and activate the module, how to check your licensing, and how to configure EFT processing for payroll. We looked at the security options for EFT processing. In the options, we looked at the payroll configuration settings, the primary bank, the payroll email settings, the default advice, the global file sequence numbers, and the updates tab. And we also looked at EFT banks and EFT employees and how to create those records, and how to set up your email messages for your remittance advices, and where to find the codes that you can use in your email body and subject. We're now going to look at the transactions and reports and periodic processing. First, we're going to use EFT transactions to create a file to be uploaded to the bank. We're going to have a look at the frequently used EFT reports and inquiries, the inquiries or report of the transfers created, so that is the EFT files that are created either in summary or in detail. And we're going to have a look to see how we can print the advices and use the predefined email templates that we just created. And then we're going to have a look at the EFT completed files audit log, so that's a full audit of all the EFT files that have been created, and the employee EFT detail audit log that refers to the changes to the employee's bank account details. It's all logged, date and time, who changed what field from what value to what value. First, you'd run your payroll, either the Canadian payroll or the US payroll, and you would post those payroll checks, because we have set in our EFT options that we only create an EFT file from posted checks. So when we come to create the EFT payroll file, we will specify the payroll period end date that we want to export from. In our EFT options on the payroll tab, because we specified that we do not allow to post from a range of pay period end dates, we can only enter a single pay period end date here. And if any of the employees in the pay period end date do not have an EFT record filled in for them, it will display an error and abort the export. And we have not allowed selective payments, so it's going to do the entire payroll period end date. And because we do not allow unposted payroll period end dates, we must select a pay period end date from one of our posted pay period end dates. So we're going to export for the 10th of January 2020. It is defaulting for us the PR Bank and the CAN CPA 005. We can override this format if we do want to select a different format, for example, a positive pay format, or we can just go ahead and create this file using the CAN CPA 005. Here we're getting a validation that the BSB number for our PR Bank is only 6 digits long. It is too short. The minimum length is 8. So either we need to create a formats.ini for ourselves, our own user formats.ini, which allows for a 6-digit BSB number if this is correct, or we'd go and correct our PR Bank and then come and re-export. And the 11 entries of our pay period end date have been exported. If we were to do an additional payroll run for the same pay period end date, and there were an additional 10 checks, let's say, on top of the 11 that we've already exported, once those are posted, we could come and select by check number range so that we don't re-export the original records if that's what you need to do. But if you did accidentally re-export the original records, EFT would warn you that you have already exported these records because it checks the EFT log of created files. If you do go ahead and re-export the file, it will be audited date and time each time the file is created. And going to this directory to see this file, in the ORCID EFT files payroll, we see the PR 2020-0110 file, and we can see the records that were created for this particular pay period end date. After creating the EFT file, you may want to print either the payroll transfers created or the payroll transfers detailed report. You can do this by period end range. And here you can see the 2 times that I've created the payroll file for this particular pay period end date. And if you wanted to print the report with the details in that file, you could print the payroll transfer details. And as you can see, the bank account number is masked, and you can only see the last 4 digits of the bank account number. And after uploading the file to the bank, you would email the employees their remittance advice. If you use print destination, it will print to your current print destination set up on your Sage 300 desktop. If you choose employee, it will go to the EFT employee record and see if you've chosen to email using an email address off the EFT employee record or off the employee Canadian or US employee record. The default remittance advice is defaulted, but you could browse and choose a custom report if you needed to. And you can go ahead and choose your payroll remittance advice email template. Choose your payroll period end date. And you can choose a range of employees or all and go ahead and print. And in this case, it would email those 11 payroll remittance advices and apply the password to the PDF and email to the employee. We can also view and clear the payroll audit logs. So this shows date and time, each of the EFT files that were created. And if you double click on any of the entries, it will show you the individual employees, their bank account details, etc., and the amounts that were paid. And in the View Clear EFT Audit Log, we see all the changes that have happened to the EFT employees, date and time, what was changed from what to what. So on this date and time, this admin changed the BSB field number from this to this. We can use Control F to filter. So if we wanted to see all the changes to employee 20060, we could go Control F to filter. And now we can see all the changes that have happened just to that employee. And we could filter on multiple fields at one time. So if we wanted to know that employee and only the account number or the BSB number, we can now see it was first added and then amended to an 8-digit number. This filter is remembered by user. We have now seen how to create an EFT file for your payroll for a payroll period end date, how to view the transfers created and the details of the transfers created, how to print and email the PDF remittance advices, and we've seen the completed EFT files audit log and the employee EFT detail audit log. We're now going to look at the EFT file formats and the remittance advices that are provided with the system. First, we're going to look at the structure of the formats.ini and how to create your own custom user formats.ini and how these files can be worked with when you're using Sage 300 customization directories. And then we'll take a look at the sample remittance advice for EFT employees the ELPR01 report. The formats.ini is a text file which is in the EFT directory, so the ELXXA directory, and is distributed and loaded each time you install the programs or a product update of the programs. It is a text file and it has each of the bank formats in square brackets. So these are the comments when we added particular formats, but if you search for a particular format in square brackets, you'll find the definition of the format. So the CAN CPA format runs from here up to the next square brackets, which is the CAN CPA 5005 BDC. You can put a shortcut on your desktop to open up this file. You can now double-click on your shortcut to edit or view the file. Searching for our CAN CPA 005. This is the format that's in use for our particular installation and configuration. When you specify an EFT file type on the EFT bank, it uses that particular specification to relabel and add new fields on your bank screen. So every bank screen has a bank branch and an account number, but they can be labeled based on your file specification. So in this particular CAN CPA 005, the BSB number is being relabeled to the financial institution ID or transit number. And you can see that label here, albeit the word number has been truncated. And the account number field has been labeled account number. But in addition to these two fields, you have 4 extra fields for your banks: Bank Extra 1, Bank Extra 2, and Bank Extra 3 and Bank Extra 4, which are not used in this particular format. But Bank Extra 1 has been labeled Destination Data Center Code, and we can see Destination Data Center Code here. And Bank Extra 2 has been labeled Short Name 15 characters, and you can see this field Short Name 15 characters here. If you needed 2 additional fields for this particular bank at a header level, you could turn on Bank Extra 3 and Bank Extra 4, but it's not needed for this particular format. Furthermore, if you use the word tip in your heading, for example, Bank Extra 1 tip, you can then put some help or text to assist the users in filling in this data. And it is because we have this Bank Extra 1 tip that this field has a hyperlink, and when we click on it, it opens up and displays the text that you've specified. Please contact your bank for the destination data center code. And the other field label that has been applied specifically for the CAN CPA 005 is the originator number. So the bank payroll payment reference has been set to the originator ID, which we can see here. So the other optional reference you have on the bank is internally called the AP payment reference for the AP1, AR payment reference for the AR1, and PR payment reference for the payroll one. And it's been relabeled the originator number. In your bank specification, in your file format, you can also validate the size of the branch number and the account number. So the branch number or financial institution ID will be validated to be between 8 and 9 digits long. And that is why when we first went to create the file for the PR bank, the branch or financial institution ID was only 6 characters long. That is why we got the error message. And what we'll do is create a user formats which allows a BSB of a shorter size. And the account number must be between 3 and 12 digits long. So these two fields can be validated by the formats.ini to try and preempt errors when sending the file to the bank. After the data has been filled in, the file format can format that data. For example, the originator ID number, it's taking the bank reference field and formatting it over 10 characters. The file creation number, it's taking the file system number, which is, if you were using the file sequence number, then it would take that next generated file sequence number, which is currently 0, but if you were using file sequence number, it would increment that number each time it exported the file. And it's right justifying it over 4 digits. It's also setting the file creation date, formatting that date as a Julian date, which is a 5-digit number, 0 filled at the left-hand side. And for the data center number, it is taking our field bank extra 1. And this particular format for payroll wants to know the payroll period end date, so we're setting a variable equal to payment for payroll period end date, and this is picking up off the XP check record the period end date and formatting it as day/month/YY, and that will be included as a comment in the file. To know what variables that you can use in the formats.ini, you can check in the F1 help. Search for formats and select the format overview, and then the EFT payroll format examples. You can select any field from the employee record, either Canadian or US employee record, and you can address it by XPEMPL, and you can address any field from the check, either CP check or UP check, and you use CHK. Then your formats.ini has header rows, detail rows for AP, AR, footer rows for AP and AR, and it also can have either a general header row or a specific header row for payroll. In this case, because we have a PR row, it's going to use this header row for our payroll, this detail row for our payroll, and this footer row for our payroll. And then for your header, you would include the fields from Sage 300 that you need in your particular bank format. So in this case, it's putting in the bank payment reference of 10 characters, which is this originator number, the file creation number, which is over 4 digits, the file creation date, which is over 6 digits, so it's the Julian date plus another leading 0, the data center number, and so on, the other fields that they need, batch currency, and then a whole lot of blank spaces. And then for every posted check that it's including in the file, it's going to include a row which starts with the letter C, the record count, so it'll start at 1, and then on the second row will be 2, and so on. It'll be the bank's payment reference, that originator number, the file creation number, and then the transaction code of 200, the amount in cents, the date, the destination BSB, which is the branch or financial institution of the employee, the account number of the employee, and then the other fields that are needed, the account name, the bank account amount coming from, and so on. If you needed to have your own version of this specification, so there was some particular reference that you wanted to include that wasn't included in our general specification, we wouldn't recommend that you do changes to the formats.ini, because each time you install a new product update or a new version, we will reissue the formats.ini based on the standard specification. But what you can do is copy the specification and save this file as user-formats.ini. And then you would do any changes here that you needed. So for example, if we wanted to cater for a BSB size that was 6 digits long, we could change this from 6 to 9. And then any branch or financial institution ID that was more than 6 and less than 9, it would accept that. And next time you go to create an EFT file, or if you open the EFT options, that formats.ini or userformats.ini, if either of those files have changed since you last opened these screens or ran the create EFT file process, then the EFT file format would be updated in the database before the file is created so that you're always using your latest specification. When you come to create EFT payroll file and you define a format, for example, CAN CPA 005, it will first check if there's a user formats.ini for this particular format. If there is, it will use it. Otherwise, it will find that format in the formats.ini. And if you're using Sage 300 customization directories, then it will first check the customization directory for the appropriate user and company and see if there's an ELXXA directory there and a user formats.ini in that directory. If there is, it will use that. Otherwise, it will revert back to the programs directory, the ELXXA directory. And if you do install Sage 300 programs in their entirety on each and every workstation, then you need to make sure the user formats.ini is up to date between the different workstations. If you install the programs on a server and just do a workstation setup on the individual clients, then you only need to have the user formats.ini in the correct server. When you come to print or email the payroll advices, the report to use will default from the options in the default advices tab, but it can be overridden at this stage if the user running the report has the security rights to change the report. This is a crystal report that you can amend to include your own logo and details that you want on the payroll remittance advice. And if you use the F1 help, you will see the details on that particular payroll remittance advice. When you are setting up your EFT, if you are not sure which format is relevant for you, you can always send us the specification from the bank and we will tell you which of these formats is appropriate for that particular specification, and or if we need to, we'll add a new format into the formats.ini if needed. We have seen the structure of the formats.ini and how to create a custom or user formats.ini if you need to make changes to the standard formats.ini. We've also seen how to work with Sage 300 customization directories with the formats.ini and user formats.ini. And we've also had a look at the sample remittance advice ELPR01. With EFT processing, we do also provide additional payroll functionality for Canadian and US payroll. You are able to email the pay slips or pay stubs from the US or Canadian payroll. And for the Canadian payroll, you are able to send the T4s and or Releve ones to employees via email. And I'm going to run through how to set up and use this functionality. We have seen that EFT allows you to print or email the payroll remittance advice for your employees. But the details that can be included on the payroll remittance advice is information from the EFT employee, the Canadian or US employee, and the associated check. There is no other details relating to the payroll or the information such as what's included on the payslip. But you can use EFT processing to email the Sage 300 payslip or T4 or Releve 1. So if you do want to use this functionality in EFT options, you must specify the payslip from the CP or UP directory that you're going to use for the pay stub or payslip. And you must also specify the payroll Releve 1 and payroll T4 report from the CT directory if you want to email those reports too. With payslips, because they cannot be regenerated after the payroll is accepted, the payslip needs to be emailed to the employee before the payroll checks are posted. And if you want to keep a copy of these payslips because they cannot be reproduced later, if you fill in a directory here, then when the payslip is emailed, the PDF copy will be stored in this particular nominated directory. For emailing payslips and T4s and Relevare 1s, you should define your email messages before you come to email the documents. In the F1 help, you can find information on the variables that you can set up in the email messages. These are for the payroll advices, and you can use the employee fields in the payslips and the T4s and Relevare 1s. And in addition, for the payslips, you can use any field from the UPCHKS, the check summary, or CPCHKS, prefixes by paycheck, and then any field name on the check summary record. So we could use this for our payslips, this one for our Relevare 1s, and this one for our T4s. If you're wanting to email the payslip to your employees, referring to our EFT processing release notes, you need to calculate your payroll and then come to print your checks. And at this point, before saying yes and posting the checks, or if you have not allocated check numbers, before you come to accept the checks, you need to go ahead and print and email the payslip. The reason for this is Sage 300 populates temporary tables with the payslip information which is only available at this point in time in your payroll processing. So you would need to assign your check numbers and then go to EFT processing and select email payslips. But if you do answer no here, then Sage 300 Payroll will mark your checks as either advice not printed or the check not printed. You can still send your payslips as long as you comment out the condition in your payslip saying and the status is not -1, which is advice not printed, or is not -2, which is check not printed. So either way, you can either do it before you answer yes here, or if you do answer no here, then make sure this statement is commented out of your payslip. The payslips are emailed from the EFT reports, print payroll stubs or slips, and you ensure you have the correct report defaulted from the EFT options. Select the correct message ID, fill in the correct payroll end date, and you can select a range of employees if you want. When you click print, it will PDF and email the payslips to the employees, applying the password if you've set that up in EFT options. And those PDFs will be in your configured directory. In the company ID, in a folder for each of the employees, you will see the PDF with the appropriate payroll period end date. And if you attempt to open that, it will ask you for the password for that particular employee. And the annual reports for the Relevare 1 and T4s can be emailed from these two options. You would select the appropriate Crystal report, message ID, year, If you do want to do a range of employees, tick boxes that you normally use from the Sage 300s option and go ahead and print. And those Releve One reports will be emailed to the employees. Similarly, for the T4s, you would select the appropriate crystal report, your message ID, the fiscal year, and fill in the details as you normally would for printing the T4s, and go ahead, click print, and it will email the T4s to the employees. For the remittance advice, payslips, T4s, and Releve Ones, as long as you have selected to use the remittance advice password and specified a password formula, then the PDFs that are emailed will be password protected based on the formula that you have specified here. We've now seen how to email the payslips, the T4s, and the Releve Ones, and how to maintain the message ID for those particular reports. Thank you for watching this training video on EFT processing for payroll. If you do need more information on EFT processing, you can go to our website, www.orchid.systems, select EFT processing from the Sage add-on by product name, and scroll down. You'll find product brochures, the EFT ROI calculator, case studies, these training videos, as well as a product demonstration and a product overview.